Hi, I'm Meshal Malik, and you're watching Indus Special. Financial security is not just a desire, but a need. That goes without saying. Then, despite this being a reality, why are our institutions failing to teach young people not only about financial literacy, but also the life and practical skills needed to become financially secure? And the bigger question is, what is leading to income inequality around the world increasing year by year? We take a look at this and try to find answers to some of these questions on today's show. Joining us for this discussion is Kamel Wazne, who's an economist. Also joining us is Ms. Saadia Saadat, who is a social activist and is also a counselor helping those in shelter homes. She joins us from London. Dr. Kamel Wazne joins us from Beirut. Thank you both for joining us and welcome to the show. Dr. Wazne, let me begin with you. Now, the gap continues to widen amongst the 1% and the rest of the population in the world in terms of income inequality. What do you think is going wrong specifically when we talk about the educational sector in this regard?
Of course, this is a major problem. If you ask anybody around the world, they will answer this is probably the biggest problem it's facing the world. Actually, when they ask the chairman of the Federal Reserve of the United States about what the most difficult things facing his job, he said how to actually confront income inequality. We have in Lebanon, we're the third country where we have income inequality, and definitely financial literacy will play a big role in helping understand the issues and probably narrow the divide between the people who have the income and those people who do not have it, because most of the wealth that has been generated in this century has been from investment in real estate, investment in the stock market. Because if you just work and earn an income, eventually that income will not be wealth later on. To have a wealth, you need to have an investment, and people need to understand what are the instruments that they should invest in it, and they should know the value of the investment and the future value of that investment, whether it's going to be in a home, whether it's going to be an index, whether it will be in stock. We noticed some stocks went from under $10 billion in assets to like $1 trillion as Apple Computer. And if you invested in that stock back in 95, a little amount of money, you're probably a millionaire today. And if you invested in an index like S&P or NASDAQ or any of these index over 30 years, even if $150, you probably accumulated some couple $100,000. So financial literacy somewhere play an important role to bring safety net to people and individuals.
Right. Dr. Wazne, as you mentioned here, that investment plays a very integral role in bringing financial security. Now, the question really comes to whether people, and especially young people who are paying for higher education, are going into depth for this higher education, are being told of these certain things, of how to accumulate wealth, how to become more financially secure. When you observe young people around yourselves, do you feel like they're financially literate?
Funny you mentioned that question, because just like I read just 6 months ago where Harvard University is teaching its graduate about financial literature. Being aware of the financial condition, of the opportunity, of the benefit of knowing what is good for you, what's bad for you is very, very imperative for everyone to know. I think sometimes a lot of people do not know what is a good investment and what is a bad investment. Sometimes we always say anything that generates a good benefit in the future, that's a good investment. Anything that generates a bad investment or negative investment or negative return in the future, that's something we deviate from it. We know that a lot of people in university put themselves on big debt. That's a big debt, but it gives a future benefit, so we encourage it. I think a lot of people around the world do not really know about financial literacy. I tried it in Lebanon to start a program where I can start teaching financial literacy, but because sometimes it's so sophisticated, it's very hard to teach the people who do not really have background so they can understand the scope and the impact of financial literacy. So it's I told it for like probably higher middle class management, which was not my intention. My intention were the poor to learn about financial literacy and how they can save and protect themselves when they get older.
Right. Dr. Wazne, and we're going to continue to pick your brain on that part there. How can people become more aware of their finances? What is good investment? What is bad investment? Before that, I want to jump to Ms. Saadia Saadat and talk to her about this. Now, Ms. Saadat, in order to have a nuanced discussion, of course, it is integral for one to understand that there are systematic factors at play which also prevent people from seeking financial security even when they're working hard. Do you see that happening, especially when we talk about gender and class?
Yes, thank you so much. It's a very good topic and quite a relevant one because we do see a lot of people, they are working very hard, but then at the end they say that they are not making enough. Part of it, I believe, is that because people, when they are getting the education, is not getting into the right field or the right path, because every person has different abilities and capabilities. So I think the institution comes into play when they actually pinpoint the capabilities or the abilities of the person, and then point them into the right direction. Because if the person is doing something which they have the aptitude for, I think they can really thrive very well in that particular field. Because so many times, especially as you say that we are like in Pakistan even, you say that so many people, the parents, they just push their children to do something and the children doesn't have any aptitude for it. So no matter if they get into that field, if they do get into the job, they won't be doing excellent in there. So they won't be good enough to earn better money for themselves and to have the better financial security for themselves.
Right. Ms. Saadat, you make a very important point, matching one's aptitude with their career path. But before I get to that, I do want to press upon these systematic factors which discriminate against certain groups, especially if we talk about women. When we're talking about the income inequality gap, of course, it's evident that women earn less than men, and that continues to persist. What do you think are the factors that lead to that becoming a reality?
Well, I think the first is that people are quite inclined that there are so many people, I'm not talking about the Asian community, but even on a wider scale, globally, there are people that who are more inclined towards their boys and then to have boys a better education. So I think the first and the foremost step is the parent has to know, and they have to equally treat the girl and the boys, so then they can have both should have an equal opportunity to excel.
Right.
And also, I do believe that there are so many places, especially for the women, when they go into the field, there are so many hindrances, like they're discriminated not only on the gender, but then they do feel harassment on. You might be aware that there are women has to somehow go through the sexual harassment into this field. Some of the field which they can do very well, but they are stopped because of those things. So I think on a wider scale, it has to be worked that which are the factors which we should work on and which should be eliminated so that women can equally work. And because some women could be very good and in the media or some other stuff, but then there are few issues which are kind of stopping them to go do very well in those fields.
Right.
So
Ms. Saadia Saadat, I take your point there. And I want to jump to Dr. Wazne and talk to him about the class dynamic in all of this. Now, when we're talking about financial literacy, financial awareness, is it just a very privileged sort of knowledge that only would help certain groups of people? And is there a gap in trying to create that awareness or communicate that to other classes, to other groups of people?
Well, it's very, first of all, the materials, sometimes it's so sophisticated that sometimes it's very hard to explain to those people who do not have the basic information. But it has to be written in a way, it has to be communicated in a way that every person should be able to understand the concept of financial literacy, because sometimes when you talk about instrument, the risk of that instrument, when you talk about like stocks, bonds, investment in index, and investment in currency, other investment in a mutual fund, all those kind of treasuries, sometimes it requires some basic understanding that is really very important. And a lot of people underestimate maybe what $100 a month can do in an index over 30 years. Sometimes the future value of an annuity, for example, a lot of people don't understand that concept, how it works, how it operates. They don't understand sometimes the gyration of the market. Sometimes it's up or down, but you have to look for the long-term horizon, how it will impact your financial returns in the long run. So I would say it is sometime for those who, it depends on the person who teach financial literacy and how he communicate that information. I taught it as a professor at the university, and I know it can be complicated to college students, but I taught it also to executives. I yet to teach it to probably people who have probably remedial information about finance, but I can make it simple.
Right.
So
Dr. Kamel Wazne, that's one of the points that is integral to understand and, of course, bring into this conversation how accessible this information is. But going back to an earlier point that we were discussing, and I feel like it's worth going back to, which is student debt rising around the world, whether it's from in developed nations or developing nations. What do you think is causing for this debt to rise continuously, year after year?
Oh, for the debt to rise, is that your question?
Yes.
Well, I think sometimes is the subductive element of marketing. They teaching us to buy things we cannot afford, but we must have, because they use marketing technique, advertising technique to make us buy it at instance where we don't have the money to buy it. You take, like, for instance, any product that they market it heavily, because most companies now, they spend tons of money on marketing to make sure that people feel that they must have it, otherwise they will be at disadvantage. I think in westernized society, because the element of credit cards and loans and availability of maybe affordable loan, it makes them more to go into that versus other countries. So it all depends on the credit and the marketing, and the world as also is spending more money than they have, and sometimes it comes at the balanced way of doing the right things for ourselves, how to balance ourselves economically and financially, not to incur a lot of debts that we cannot afford to pay. Sometimes we don't want to be a slave to our debt, and we are sometimes if we really went deep into debt.
Right. Ms. Saadat, now going back to you, you also work for the counseling of people in shelter homes. What is that like? And how is that process important for people to go back on track in their lives, become more financially secure, being able to afford a decent lifestyle?
I really likes the point that Dr. Wazne was pointing out, that we shouldn't be slave to our debts. You will notice that from the very beginning, people start having the student loan and all the other stuff of loan. So people they get used so much to this loan thing that by the time they go and like eventually they lead the practical life, they are so much into the debts that they cannot sustain themselves. And that is why so many people, they commit so many crimes, and then they end up in the shelter homes, because I think the finance is you have to have your livelihood stable in order to thrive. So if this is something which is lacking in you,
but Ms.
then you
Saadia
should work
Saadat,
on it.
is this a simplistic point to assume that people only are forced into crime and certain points of breaking the law because they are in debt? Isn't it true that the global economic system also disadvantages many people?
Yes, exactly, because the Maslow theory of hierarchy come into place, like when these point of discussions, because you have to have your food on your plate, you have to have your shelter, and then only you can do other things. So if you are not getting fed, or if you do not have a house over your head, then obviously people will do things or make them, like people will be inclined to do things that they just need to feed themselves. So if this is where you should really work upon that. You should know that these are the things or the factors which are for the person to be for their well-being.
Right. Ms. Saadat, stay with me on that point. I want to take Dr. Kamel Wazne's take on this. Now, Dr. Kamel Wazne, what do you feel is wrong in our global economic system that continuously leads to a widening of income inequality, continuously rewards the rich and makes the poor even more poor? What do you think is wrong in the system?
Well, sometimes it could be a lot of things wrong with the system because we are capitalist environment, a capitalist environment where we actually give more incentive to the rich at the expense of the poor. Probably has to do with the tax system, that has to do with the regulation, where sometimes it's very hard for the poor to penetrate the system and probably promote it through the system, and sometimes probably not having advocate education could be the critical element for not advancing in a society. Sometimes could be education is probably the tool that will empower us to excel and join probably the prosperity that somewhere people are enjoying. But probably the most I can probably look at it, sometime if you don't have a right tax system, a progressive tax system, and you don't have a good subsidy system that really look after the poor to bring them out of poverty and bring them into a system where they can enjoy and share prosperity. Most of the countries that do not have adequate education system, good university.
But in order for this education system to work, is it futile if it just leads to greater debt? What do you think needs to happen in terms of a global overhaul of the education system in order to make it more accessible, the education, make it of good quality, but also ensure that students don't end up with debt, lifelong debt, and without being able to get jobs that can actually pay for that debt?
Well, we speak in here in general, but eventually this is a mobile society, and as we are live in a mobile society, sometimes education can be transferred from one place to another place, and you can capitalize in your education. Yes, sometimes you incur a lot of debt, but if you don't have that education, you probably don't have the chance to move higher up in a higher job and higher opportunity. So I'm always good for taking a big debt if it has a future benefit. And investing in education definitely will have a positive result. Sometime not right away, not 2 years later, but sometime it definitely will have a payback period that
Right.
you will be happy that you made that investment.
Right. Ms. Saadat, let me just ask one last question here. Now, we see how volatile the economy can be. In this, what does the government need to do in order to help and support those who, because of rising debts, because of rising costs, lose homes, have to live in shelter homes, or because of any other social factors? What do you think are the responsibilities of the state in this regard?
I think the first and the foremost the government should do that they should act accordingly to the educational institution. They should work together. They should plan things which are need of the industry. Because here what we see is that the educational institution, they are doing lots of graduates, but they do not know exactly what the industry is required for. If the industry is changing, they need to look at the point that it is a changing time. Now, there were times that doctors and engineers were required, but nowadays it's the IT which is required. It's the cloud, because everything is on the cloud now. So this is where it's heading towards
So
the
there needs
artificial
to,
intelligence,
right.
towards the robotics.
There
So
needs to
we
be
should
greater
prepare
coordination between the educational institutions and the government. Thank you so much on that point, Ms. Saadia Saadat, for joining us from London, and Dr. Kamel Wazne for joining us from Beirut. We're going to take a short break. When we return, we're going to continue our discussion. Stay with us. Welcome back to the show. While we continue our discussion regarding what factors lead to children and especially young adults becoming more financially literate, and what can they do in order to move towards better skill development. Now joining us for this discussion is Mr. Ahmed Rauf Essa, who's an entrepreneur. He has co-founded Telemart, one of the largest e-commerce platforms in Pakistan. He joins us from Karachi. Thank you so much, Ahmed, for joining us, and welcome to the show. Now, as we're talking about financial security, financial literacy, of course, there's something to be talked about when it comes to skill development and the job market. Do you feel like being self-employed helps in bettering your skills?
See, of course, when you are self-employed and you have a level playing ground that you can explore, you know everything out of. Talking about myself, I'm from a marketing background. So running a company, I have to look after the sales as well, the business development part as well, the marketing as well, the accounts as well. So when you're an entrepreneur, the best part about entrepreneurship, or sometimes a CTA company or a small size or medium sized company, is that you always have hands in every department. You have knowledge about everything.
Right. Emma, now you mentioned that you're from a marketing background. How much did your education help in your endeavor as an entrepreneur? How much do you feel like it prepares you for the real world?
See, I have graduated from one of the reputable, most reputed business institute of Pakistan. But unfortunately, the curriculum that we follow, that is imposed by HEC or the university, is something that I think is not making sense to the business world. Because when I did my bachelor, I was studying as well as working for Telemart as well. So then coming up to office, looking at the practical world, and then going back to university and seeing what we are studying, and everything we see is absurd, and it's very ambiguous to study such course books. For a person like me, for example, when we were studying marketing, the books that we studied were from 1870s or 1970s or 1980s. And you know, in the world that we live in, we are changing nearly every day. And the field is it's in a good pace. And reading a book and reading case studies of Starbucks and Apple only will not change our generation.
So how important do you feel like it is to contextualize the knowledge to your location? And I'm not just specifically talking about Pakistan, but all over the world, when students are forced to follow a certain type of curriculum without actually being aware of their own place, location, and the social environment. How do you feel like that creates a hindrance for them to actually move forward?
See, that is because normally when you're going to a university or a high school, you are following a curriculum, you are following a daily routine that is 9 to 4 or 9 to 3 daily, and then you don't have time to Google, to study more, to learn more. And the best part about me was that I dragged my courses a bit. So the normal time frame for a bachelor's degree is 4 years. I did that bachelor's in 5.5 years. And the reason was I was doing my work parallel, and I was also studying, I was also researching on various parts of the business. And that is the key to my success, that I was giving more time towards my venture, towards the company that I'm working for, and less times towards the education. Because for me, what I was considering education is that it was not adding more and more value towards my business.
Right. And yet you still continue to seek that education. Now, I'm trying to bring this into the conversation that we were having earlier, which was about student debt rising all around the world. Now, if students continue to feel like their education doesn't add value, what do you feel like needs to change in the system?
See, the overall curriculum needs to change. Universities nowadays are working more on the practical knowledge as well. Even the university I am from, I did my master's from, a bachelor's from, is now having a course by the name of Capstone. There are 2 courses by the name of Capstone where you don't have to study anything, and you are giving a real-time experience in the companies who have provided some different proposals or different business activities. And we go to these brands, we work as employees for them, and see the practical knowledge that they have and learn more and more, so that any time or any person who is entering into the business field knows what is happening in the practical world.
Right. Now, Ahmed, just going back a little and talking about your own experience, why you chose the path of developing your own business, putting so much hard work in it. Now, of course, it is less structured than, a 9-to-5 job or something with a steady pay, but you still opted for it. What drove you towards that option?
See, I've always believed in one thing, that not being a part of any job and creating more job opportunities is what Pakistan is looking for. And we, as a youngster, I think that this is the best time for every youngster to step in and to build up. Now, even in Pakistan, we see a word coming up, startup again and again, that people are now working more and more on their business ideas, generating more jobs and more job opportunities in Pakistan, which is very fruitful for themselves as well and also for the country.
Right. On that point, I'd also like to introduce another guest. Joined us, Ms. Dora Marinova, who's a professor of sustainability at the Curtin University. She joins us from Perth. Thank you so much, Ms. Marinova, for joining us, and welcome to the show. Now, when we're talking about how things need to change for the future, especially in terms of how many young people are unable to get jobs after investing so much into their education, what do you feel like needs to change in terms of at a national level and at an international level?
It's a very good question that you're discussing tonight, because particularly in the area of sustainability, a lot of the jobs are not the jobs that existed, say, 5 or 10 years ago, or even 20 years ago. So it's quite important that education provides lifelong learning skills and opportunities for people to come up with the creativity and the new ideas that will help solve some of the problems that the previous generations created, or the previous employers created, put it this way. So it's quite important that people don't just look at replacing jobs that already existed in the economy, but creating new opportunities. I can give you an example. I'm in Western Australia. In Western Australia, we have 60,000 abandoned mine sites. So they need rehabilitation. Do we prepare people how to create this rehabilitation, what to do with these mine sites? A lot of indigenous people, indigenous communities are looking at going back to traditional knowledge and using traditional plants, traditional seeds to actually restore the vegetation over these mine sites. So it's quite interesting that we should not just preparing the engineers that can operate the mining technologies, but we also need to look at what are the consequences from these technologies.
Right. Now, Ms. Marinova, as Ahmed was mentioning, he started his business to try to capture a market space that existed, an opportunity. Now, when we're talking about jobs, employment, there's always this argument that is made that the supply of workers doesn't meet the demand of workers. Do you witness and observe this disconnect in the global economic system?
Usually what the market demands differs, because in many ways the market has gone ahead of what the universities are providing or what the training organizations are providing. Because what we are seeing is that the market is quite flexible, quite future-oriented, and at the same time quite depending on whether you're looking at risk, how much risk you can take. And we see a lot of entrepreneurial businesses that can take up risk very well. And at the same time, we see a lot of established businesses, which tend to be bigger ones, right, that are risk averse.
Right. Ms. Marinova, not to put you on the spot here now, I know you're a professor, but what do you think is going wrong here when universities can't keep up to date with the market? Now, the expenditure of higher education is well known. It's creating, in the US alone, 1.5 trillion amount of debt for students. Now, that's just the US. We can imagine the global picture. What do you think is causing for this disconnect between the university and the market?
One possibility is that we are preparing people for the jobs of today and the past rather than for the jobs of the future. So a lot of universities have actually acknowledged this, and now we are trying to develop more generic skills rather than specialized skills. If we're going through narrow specialization, we are essentially cutting off some of the opportunities for the students to have in the future. So an emphasis on generic skills and generic ways of learning, developing competences, developing ideas, and being creative is much more what is expected these days than replacing particular engineering skills or social science skills or accounting skills. So it's very important, the generic approach.
Right. Ahmed, I'd like your take on this as well. Now, there's always this discussion about whether specialized skills or generic skills would be more beneficial. Now, Ms. Marinova's take on this is, of course, that generic skills are more sustainable for the future. Do you believe that is true as an entrepreneur?
See, generic skills are always ranked higher than some specific field. The reason is there is a degree by the name of bachelor's, BBA or MBA. And normally these people fit in every place. That's the beauty of that degree. So a general field, when you're starting something in general, you're not a master of one thing, but yes, you can fit in everywhere and you can learn everything that is. So that is something that I have also fit in. I am not a technology guy. So for a person like me who is running a technology business, I am not much into technology. I don't know how to code. I don't know what are backends, what are website. And we started up like this as well. So a person like me who have general knowledge about everything, nearly everything now, and we know how to run everything. And that is something that is complementing our business so that we can hire specialized people with us and make them work for our objective.
Right. Ms. Marinova, now when we're talking about the future and ensuring that our economic systems are also sustainable, meaning that they are more inclusive instead of leaving more and more people behind in this income inequality we talk about, what do you think is important to happen for the system to change and become more inclusive?
To me, it's very important that people engage in jobs that are meaningful to them. Not all jobs are attractive. Jobs have to offer satisfaction. People need to feel that whatever they're doing is improving their own situation as well as the prospects of their children, the prospects of the society in which they live. So the exploitative capitalist type of market economy, which is based around competition, is no longer something that young people like. People want to perform to the best of their abilities by making everybody benefit rather than just
but does the economics, sorry to interrupt you here, but does the economic system reward passion? Is it just that people who are passionate wanting to do what they want to do, are they rewarded for it?
In some cases, they're rewarded. In other cases, people just decide that they would not be working for anybody else, but they will start their own business. And we see a lot of perfect examples when people are starting something which is quite in tune with their passion and which makes sense to them. So young people these days can start a new business very easily because of technologies such as, you're in Karachi, I'm in Perth, I'm not sure where you are, but you're in Lahore. I'm in Perth. And we can still talk to each other. So these days, this global connectivity allows us to take advantage of the knowledge and the ideas that you have anywhere. And you can establish your own business when you're unhappy with the environment that provides you work, which is kind of backward or doesn't satisfy your ambitions and your interests.
Right. Ahmed, as an entrepreneur and someone who wants to get into the field of being, of any field in which they're starting up their own business, what are some of the key factors to remember in order for them to protect themselves financially?
See, every person who is stepping into a business industry, I always feel you should take a risk, but that should be very calculated. Nowadays, we see people coming up in the business field, they have passion about a few things, or they know what they want to do. But unfortunately, they have not done the research part of the business, and they lack the research part. They don't know how to start, where to get the funds from, what would be the operation flow, what should be the business model, and how can we have a feasible business model. How can we be profitable? So these are the key points for any person to step into the business world. I have been meeting startups, small businesses since the last 4 or 5 years now. And unfortunately, the ratio would be around 1% who are taking calculated risk, who know what they are doing. They have passion, they have revenue streams as well. And they know how to achieve that. Hard work is not the key. Smart work is the key. So people doing hard work and trying to achieve something good, I think they should more focus on the smart work so that they can achieve their targets.
Being up to date with the research, putting in the time to become more financially literate. Those are important points that you've highlighted. Thank you so much, Ahmed, Rauf, Essa for joining us from Karachi, and Ms. Dora Marinova for joining us from Perth. Thank you for watching Indus Special. We will see you again tomorrow with more stories. Till then, goodbye and take care.